This is Joel Kotkin.
And this is Marshall Toplansky.
And you're listening to the Feudal Future podcast. Our society is being rapidly reduced to a feudal state, a process now being exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of small businesses are near extinction. Millions more are losing their jobs, and many others will be stuck in the status of propertyless serfs. The big winners have been the expert class of the clerisy, and most of all, the tech oligarchs, who benefit as people rely more on algorithms than human relationships.
With this, around the world, the middle class is becoming more squeezed than ever, and it's having profound economic, social, and spiritual implications. Here on the show, we're having conversations with business, government, and citizen leaders like you to get to the core of these issues and explore how we can work together to form a better future than the one we're headed towards. Hello, and welcome to another blood-pumping episode of the Feudal Future podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And we are delighted today to have Andrew Romans with us. Andrew is CEO of and general partner of his own fund called the 7BC Venture Capital Fund, is also CEO and general partner of Rubicon, which is a very well-known venture capital firm. He's the author of 3 books on venture capital, Masters of Corporate Venture Capital, the Entrepreneurial Bible of Venture Capital, and most recently, the Masters of Blockchain, which is just a fantastically popular book. It's been translated into multiple languages. Andrew, we're delighted to have you with us.
Hey, Marshall, great to be here, and Joel, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, what we'd like to start off with is kind of your view of the concentration of power in the hands of a relatively small number of global tech companies. You know, you're an investor in early stage businesses, and it's essential for you to be able to see a robust entrepreneur marketplace. Is the concentration of power in the large tech companies having an effect on that? What's the impact of all of that?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of good and bad. The first time you hear this as an American, we kind of grew up with parents that came back from World War II, kind of scene where you think everybody here can afford a car and a house and vacations, whereas in Brazil, it's like 2% of the population owns 80% of the country. And we kind of grew up, at least in my growing up in the 70s and the 80s as a kid, you think, well, this is a better place, the United States, than what they've got in Brazil. Now that I've been to Brazil, I don't know. I think that's a pretty damn good place. But that's sort of like a cultural starting point. So you tend to say this is not good, that there's so much concentration. But if you really dig into it, some of it is kind of interesting, that you've got so much wealth in control of entrepreneurs. It's not like 200-year-old Sumitomo Marubeni from Japan, where the culture is don't do anything, in control. I mean, you've literally got, you know their names of the guys that run Amazon, Facebook, Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Facebook, or what is it? So you've got Apple. Yeah, so I left out Apple, but I'll say one thing and then get more into whatever you want to talk about. But on a positive side, I have a slide when I'm fundraising for my VC fund, when I go to a place like Saudi Arabia or Dubai, where they all believe in investing in real estate because they can see the pool, they can see the dining area and go, that's mine, and I can touch it. Where like, can they touch the software as a service of Salesforce? Like Benioff had to build a building so you could see this is real. You can touch the building, where we have a slide that says 20 years ago, these were the 5 largest companies on the US stock exchange by market capitalization. And it was all dirty oil companies and dirty banks. So we have their logos in black. And then you see Microsoft pops in. So there's Exxon Mobil and now Microsoft. We have their logo in green because it's clean. And then you keep going fast forward, and now it's Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, and Facebook.
And well, and by the way, add to that the new Chinese power centers of Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba, also with massive market caps and massive ability to absorb new technologies.
Which, by the way, shows me that there's positive. And I want to come back to why. Let's talk about the Chinese, development of big balance sheet buyers is the best thing that can happen to a venture capitalist, right? Because you want to exit to all those guys. But I had to update our slide because I'm still using the slide. I hadn't updated it, that the market caps were have gone crazy. So the market caps of Apple is like 2 trillion. And 1.5 trillion, you feel not as good as the big one. Little baby Facebook has not even got a market cap of 1 trillion yet, And so I'll just make one point and send it back to you guys is when you've got a $2 trillion market cap or a $1.5 trillion market cap to announce you're going to break ground on a $1 billion campus in Austin and a $1 billion campus in Raleigh-Durham, Research Triangle Park, is like Safeways or Vons opening a new store outside of La Jolla, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything for them. So that's like the US Army kicking the Slovenian army out of their way. And that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I would say interesting, but from a historian's point of view, disastrous. There is no case of a country where there has been so much concentration in so many companies that employ so few people, have such complete control, 80-90% market share, and you don't have a democracy anymore. You have a plutocracy, and when 4 or 5 basically ignorant when it comes to history or the Constitution, people deciding what can be said, what can't be said, what's in the digital gulag, what isn't in the digital gulag. When you have a culture where startup companies that are not part of your nice little network have no chance. I mean, there's just no way. I mean, what the system we have now seems to me to be a bunch of venture capitalists who backed a bunch of companies and have already made a lot of money, now go out and try to find another niche that they can also similarly either dominate or hope that one of the big companies buys them. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me to be an ideal situation. And I would add, as Robert Gordon at Northwestern has shown, we haven't had a big increase in productivity. The inequality has gotten worse. The prospects for the middle and working class have gotten worse. I don't see where this system is necessarily such a good thing. Yes, you're completely right that and I think it is true that the dynamism of the American economy can be seen by the change in the Fortune 500. You just don't have that kind of change in most other countries. On the other hand,
the exception of China.
What? Except in China. But in China, these are all relatively new companies too. I mean, they're not, when you talked about Morabini and
we're going to get dominated. Let's have Bill Gates dominating us. But right. We can get onto Zuckerberg too.
But the danger I see is that they have so much money and they are able to manipulate the information system. I mean, all of us in my business, I'm a writer, okay? And my views are not conventional, but they're certainly hard to categorize, okay? But the bottom line is this: every day, our social media fellow, Hassan, we're always looking, are we getting it blocked? Did I say something that was considered offensive by some jerk working for Mark Zuckerberg? I don't know. I think that this is a very scary thing. When I started covering Silicon Valley back in the 80s, or actually late 70s, early 80s, in those days it was tremendously competitive. The productivity and technological gains were great. You can't tell me that the Microsoft is better now than it was 10 years ago. I don't think so. I don't think Google is better than it was 10 years ago. Certainly far less reliable. So the reality is, what we're seeing is this concentration of wealth and power. And now these people are so wealthy that they essentially are coming up with a system which I call oligarchical socialism, where a few very, very rich people are in favor of there being a, sort of a universal basic income, keep everybody in their little apartments, smoking pot, drinking, playing video games. There's no pathway for upward mobility. There's no pathway for upward mobility. You basically, it's the end of democracy in all intents and purposes. So I'm a little less sanguine, to say the least.
Well, Joel, so let's break down some of these topics into separate topics. So you've got politics, democracy. Right. I want to talk about that. You've got the overall economy in the United States and globally, separate issues there. You've got what does it mean for the middle class? And then to develop that last one is what's going on with upward mobility, downward mobility, or getting stuck. Okay. So on politics, I'm the first to say, to hell with the Constitution. I'd love to be elected president and say, I'm trashing this Constitution. It's a bad one. Why don't we adopt the one we wrote for the Japanese? That's a better Constitution. This Constitution made sense for the 13 colonies. But why does my vote in California or Texas count for one? You need like 1,000 votes in California to equal one person in North Dakota. So I'm all a lot of those things, the Constitution, make no sense to me. And I believe in a true democracy. Now, if you've got Facebook has, they're paying like $300 million budget to the former prime minister of Denmark and some reputable people to decide if Trump is muted or not. That's insane. The amount of, and then taking money from Russians to run ads that make Hillary look crazy or whatever. I think that there is a problem with, big Twitter and Facebook and algorithms, radicalizing people in any direction on YouTube. This is all real stuff. So there's political stuff is disastrous, but, saying like this was written 2,000 years ago and therefore I should follow that law doesn't make sense to me in my life. And the Constitution, which was written for a different time in history, doesn't make sense to me in a democracy. That's one thing. Now, on the economy, this is interesting of the concentration of online advertising in the hands of just 3 companies. So like what percentage of all online spend was going to Google and Facebook? It was like 70%. And then, and it was 95% of the growth over certain years.
Right.
There's only so many times they can get you to put your ad there. And now it's 2021. The growth is going to stop after they've squeezed the juice out of the pits there. So now they got to go to Africa or somewhere else. But that's probably not a good thing. And now Amazon, with all of its power, is vertically and horizontally integrating into everything touching the internet. And so those 3 guys have too much. But on the VC perspective and, backing companies that outperform other ones, if I see a company putting all their ads on Google, Facebook, and Amazon, I think these are lazy, stupid, bad entrepreneurs. I like entrepreneurs that figure out where their customers are on the internet, which is not only overpriced Facebook and all that, and then put their ads on like 15 different web assets and mobile assets and treat it like a portfolio manager. Drop the bottom ones, add new ones, and lower their cost of acquiring a customer to their lifetime value. But so on the economy, I think it's scary that they're there. On the other hand, and I'll stop here and we can talk about what it means for the middle class and upward, downward mobility, is look at China and let's compare China to France and back to the US. So the French government said, we want a Silicon Valley in our country, damn it. And we're 85% of venture-backed startups in France that go M&A, which is your most positive outcome, get acquired by American buyers. And I love saying this in the front of the French, get a couple government guys. So if this statistic remains static for the next 30 years, all of your university graduates that go into tech which is where all the engine of innovation and growth is. Look, in the US, we have no more banks and oil companies. It's all West Coast tech, 5 biggest publicly traded companies. That's a pattern. It's going to get bigger there. All the French, 85% of the M&A going to get bought by American companies. So how do you feel about American masters? Probably not so good. So what they're doing is they're pumping money from the government into any VC fund in Paris. So every VC fund in Paris has got like 50% plus of their cash from the government, and they're pumping a bunch of startups that eventually get bought by American companies. Now, what they're missing is what the Chinese have made. Big balance sheet buyers. Name one company in Europe that you can sell a tech company to. I can name a few, but most people stop after SAP, and that's right. German. The French kind of don't like the German master either, do they? And you're a historian. So the Chinese have, as Marshall was saying, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu. There's just an endless list of huge companies that the stock market rewards them whenever they buy anybody with accretive stock. And that stock, that flywheel is on fire moving forward. So I think that in one hand, it's a curse, as you're citing, Joel, that you've got 5 dominating companies and a bunch of others that are not that far behind them. But on the other hand, that's what makes the United States and its kind of pan-US Silicon Valley so amazing, that these $1 trillion valuations can afford to experiment and buy. Facebook could buy Instagram just to stop photos from going to Twitter. Turned out to be the best acquisition of all time. But they can spend $1 billion for a no revenue company just to deep six it and stop it from going to the hands of a competitor.
Well, let's focus on that a little bit further. So, if you start thinking about the impact of this system on middle class people, right? We're kind of, what you're implying is that basically we have a bunch of small slot machine players that are feeding money into the casino, and that it's in the casino's vested interest to kind of keep spiffing them to keep playing. And who knows, somebody may hit the jackpot. Then, by the way, it still goes back into the big casino's till. So basically what's happening is that the VC money, your money, is happy to invest in smaller new startups because you have an assured exit on the other end from one of the big companies. Are we, in the old days, right, pre all of this, people looked at their lives and said, hey, I'm going to have a career, I'm going to have a job, maybe not a job for life, but it's going to be a job where somebody pays me to actually do something. And, then I'm going to stop doing it when I'm old and they're going to pay me for having, done it for 30 years. The new game is, hey, everybody take a shot, right? Everybody become an entrepreneur, because that's really the only way you're ever going to break out of kind of the labor slavery, in a way, of being bonded to the wheel. Do you see it that way?
Well, first of all, I think that in certain cultures like Japan, even today, top graduate, top of his class, top 1%, like the number one person graduating from University of Tokyo in their kind of Harvard class, their first choice for a job is, I want to work for the government. Their second choice is, I want to work for a large corporation or, big bank. And like their last choice is to be an entrepreneur. Whereas I remember, I was getting my MBA in 2000, 2001 and at Georgetown, and the .com crash happened. And everyone said, B2B is business to business and B2C was business consumer. And so they said, what B2B means now? Back to banking. And what B2C means? Back to consulting. I think I'm going to go get a job at McKinsey now. Whereas before, they didn't want to work for McKinsey. They wanted to get rich quick. I think we have an issue with the youth in our country where they actually want to be YouTube influencers or Instagram influencers, which sounds just disgusting to me. Like, how can I make money with adding no value, with no talent, with no education or any hard work? Like, do the work. It's do the work is the opposite of like their theme song. And then the other one is, oh, this entrepreneurship track looks really easy. I'm going to do that. Except I'm going to be bigger than Zuckerberg. And I listened to a song called I Want to Be a Billionaire, like a millionaire, like what are you trying to buy, that you need $1 billion. So I think it's sad and disgusting that, culture is evolved to that level. I think that Joel, I could sense in what you're talking about that you don't have an optimistic view of what the opportunity is for middle class or youth growing up in the middle class. And I'm an optimist, and I think that the news cycle will make you want to hang yourself, but there's a lot of things improving. And there was a comment in there somewhere that Google and Microsoft are not better now, or things are not getting better. I think if we can access data that's like proprietary data sets that companies have possession of, they're not really using, and API, unlock that data and unsilo it and kind of wash it and clean it with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and have algorithms that begin to automate human workflows, it'll actually raise the intellectual level of work and self-value and purpose that individuals in the middle class are doing, and that they will be able to ultimately have a higher standard of living and have a more rewarding work life. Like when I saw Trump say, I want you to work in coal, I want your kids to work in coal, and your kids' kids to work in coal. I'm like, who is this guy? Who is this gangster? I don't want my kids to have black lung. Anything but that. Retrain them. There's startups that'll give you online software boot camp for free, and you pay your tuition out of an income share agreement after you get a great job and you get out of your mama's basement in Ohio.
Okay, look, first of all, I've got about 40 years of data which says, this is where we're headed, okay? And by the way, not just in this country, even in China and certainly in Europe, the same basic patterns where the upward mobility of the new generation is extremely limited. I can demonstrate that, easily. The real issue besides that is how do we as a society, I think actually just because something old doesn't mean it's bad or it's irrelevant. I don't know. I think there were some pretty good insights in the Bible. There's an old book. Because I had 6-7 years of Latin, so I tend to like the classics. I think learning those things are important. I am sure that if I went to the tech oligarchs of today, the number who have studied the classics in any significant way is de minimis, I would argue, and the same view that you're showing on the Constitution. The worst thing I can see is we let the technology people take over everything and tell us, we can figure out the best way of doing it. What actually the Constitution does is not necessarily all smart, but what it does is it restrains. The great problem is that if you get rid of the Constitution is the one thing that makes sure that we don't take too dramatic leaps particularly when we don't need to. World War II was a different situation. Depression was different. This is nothing remotely close to that. And even then, the Constitution was able to adjust, but it adjusted not completely. It adjusted enough. So it's not necessarily, it's not the Ten Commandments. But if we didn't have this system, and if we didn't have the smaller states having some more power in the Senate, if everything was done as it is in many European countries where it was all the popular vote, and I think it would be very, very difficult to restrain the ugly extremes that we have on the right and the left. That's what the Constitution was built up.
I disagree. I think that I would be much happier to live in the United States if the United States were to edit and rewrite the Constitution to look closer to the Japanese Constitution, which was written by the United States, and that it was written in more modern times than our Constitution was written for the 13 colonies. But look, let's not burn up all of our time on that. I would say that when you worry about a feudal future, which I love the Shakespearean oxymoron of feudal is the past and the future is for it, and you're like, what? So I think it's great. But is education and healthcare, that we have a culture that says, I'm taking care of my kids and F everybody else. And that's a kind of the American way. And if you look at the percentage of household income in 1945 for a family in the United States, what percentage of their household income was going to healthcare and education? I don't know, but I don't think it was the percentage that it is now. Like to get to study under, Marshall at Chapman University, what is all in? What is 4 years all in with no financial aid?
Yeah, at least up north of $250,000.
It's north of $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what if I have 4 kids? What if I have 4 kids that, God help me, get into Chapman? I got to clear $1 million, after tax before I can not shackle them with student loan debt. And so I think that the percentage of household income that can be going to study the classics, and I believe in the value of reading Ovid and a toga party, both, okay? Not just sending me to software boot camp to give me the education I need to survive in the wild, where no one's giving me any help with education and healthcare. But I think the percentage of, and if you want to, if something goes wrong and you're paying your $2,000 a month and you can still get hit with a $30,000 miscarriage or baby, the percentage of this happening is pretty high, that you're going to either have a baby or a miscarriage. This system is crazy. I lived in England under the NHS, and if you want to pay for a private room, you pay for it. And it would never be like your $25,000 a year on healthcare premiums or your $20,000 hits that come along. So the percentage of American household income going to healthcare and education, that's your feudalism today. You don't have to wait for the future. Feudalism is here thanks to your not elected government, in my opinion. So I think that these two things are insane.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and it would be it would delight my sense of the contradictions of the capitalist class, to put it in one term. If you had, let's say, a completely open, direct democracy, where essentially, voting laws versus very, very, easy, and you had mass manipulation, through the media, whatever. What would be great is to see all you guys get defunded and confiscated, because that's probably where you'd end up.
Oh, so in other words, just as Facebook says, we're going to demonetize X, Y, or Z people that we don't agree with, they would demonetize the VCs that fund.
Well, the great, and this is, Andrew, I'd be interested in your point here, because I think this is very relevant. The tech industry has basically signed on to the progressive agenda of the Democratic Party. That's what, there's Peter Thiel, there's a few outliers, but not too many.
So with that kind of megaphone control of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter,
right?
Is that good for democracy? And of course it is not.
But here's the other thing, the great irony, which I love, because being a historian, you have to like irony or you'd go crazy, is basically what's really interesting is you have an alliance in the tech world with people essentially like AOC and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who'd like to confiscate your money tomorrow. So I think it's going to be very interesting, this kind of, how long will the tech people support the sort of left agenda until that left agenda comes and bites them in the butt?
Well, listen, I don't like any of them. Like, Elizabeth Warren saying, let's pay for sex changes for prisoners. And she was trying to get elected saying that. I mean, I think it's insane. I actually like Bernie Sanders, but I'm not sure I want him to be making all the decisions. I think he's healthy to have him.
Yes.
His crazy megaphone. And I actually went to University of Vermont and I voted for him in 1989, saying to myself at the time, this guy from Brooklyn is so crazy. Send him down there to Washington. He'll get nothing done, but it's healthy for someone to be calling out, like Robin Williams has the thing, the comedian, saying, our politicians should be like NASCAR. They should have to wear all the logos of all their sponsors right on them to be open about it. Right?
That's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
That's a constitutional amendment.
But look, guys, I'd like to introduce a different thought or spin it a different way. So when if you look back at the kind of earlier industrial era, the world was much more dependent upon labor as a force, right, to be able to create economic wealth. And what happened was labor became mobilized in the process and became a huge piece of the political process, right? Because you had to pander to the large number of people that were working. We're now moving into this world of AI, which at the end of the day, excuse me, AI is basically just a new wave of automation. And so we're going to have fewer and fewer people employed in kind of real jobs. What's the impact of that on the political system?
Well, I spent some time in Austria for about 2 years, and I was covering other parts, like all the way to Sarajevo, Czech and Slovak republics. And basically Austria used to control half of Europe, and they had all the factories in the other countries. Like, why should I stick a factory in my front yard when I can just look at a beautiful lake, like I'm in Lake Como kind of setup? And then when they got sliced off, you were left with this tiny country with no factories in it, and yet these imperial palaces, right? Imperial palaces. I think that the United States, truly should be, we don't want our kids to work in coal or work, welding something at the Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford's assembly line. We should automate as much as possible these factories and lighten them up where hardware is connected with IoT. So you have software measuring, making changes, fixing things, optimizing things. And the factory should be automated because we don't want to even pay for shipping. Like,
you know what, though, that transformation is well underway, the automation of the kind of manufacturing economy. What we're really seeing, though, and I'm worried about for the future, is the automation of the service economy.
Yeah.
That, the real question is anybody going to have a job?
Right. So let's look at history, look at what's happening, where we're going, and then what does it mean for people with real jobs, as you said, real jobs. We had an arbitrage of labor costs. And so the low cost labor arbitrage made China the factory of the world. And then now costs getting very expensive to be in China. If you've been there recently, you can spend more money there than, Ohio would be cheaper than that place. And so now that labor arbitrage opportunity is going to India, Vietnam, and other places, not to mention the political forces, against having China be the factory of the world forever. That's going to end. All those offshoring of the outsourcing support of Goldman Sachs to Indian call centers and stuff, and Indian simple engineering things, is getting onshored with technology. So what is happening, whether you like it or not, is that dangerous jobs of going underground and looking for coal is going to be done with a robot, just like you would send a robot to defuse a bomb in Afghanistan. It's crazy to send your uncle in there to do that in the middle of, he's going to rappel inside of a Chernobyl, reactor. So all that's going to happen whether you like it or not. So what we want to have happen is that we want to get the patents and own it. We want to sell automated factories to Toyota. You know how I upset the French? I upset the Japanese, saying, if you keep waiting for April and do nothing, you're going to buy automated technology for your factories from the Chinese. So where are the jobs? So the jobs, we should be the Austrians controlling half of Europe with our brilliance. And so I think that Americans should be creating startups, driving a wave of safety and automation and drones and software that automates human workflows, and that the machine can read all these clinical trials of vaccines. You have 12 PhDs, cost $12 million a year to be reading all these things. They can program the machine to read them, instantly, and write software to make sure it complies with, the FDA or whatever their marketing materials say. So basically, you're going to need to go to Chapman University if you want to be an Austrian and control half of the map and live in a beautiful place that's green without smokestacks.
Well, remember one thing. The Austrians also invented psychotherapy. Which we could probably use reinventing. We could probably use reinventing in this turbulent feudal future world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that wanting to be the Habsburgs should be our ambition.
Let's drop the metaphor. Let's just go there.
But I think the point that Marshall's making is where are the jobs going to come from? Like, for instance, let's take, an industry that I spent my life in, which is the media. Okay. When I was in the media, there were all those, in the beginning, lots of jobs, paid pretty well, lots of competition. Now, because of what you talked about with the control over the media, in terms of advertising, like for instance, I own websites, and I always ask my executive editor, I said, how come, we get 100,000 hits? How come we don't make anything? Well, because it turns out that Google takes 80-90% of the ad revenue, so we can't make anything. So the question is, don't you think we need some restraints on these giant companies to create more opportunity for entrepreneurial ventures? Wouldn't it have been better if Instagram had been an independent company and it created its own set of platforms? Wouldn't
Well,
it have been?
Instagram's a funny case. I mean, Twitter wanted to buy it, and if Twitter had bought it, Facebook would have lost a lot more than 1% of its, at the time, $100 billion market cap. Yeah, on antitrust, I mean, I remember I founded a company called the Global Tel Exchange. We went to IPO at a $1.2 billion market cap with Morgan Stanley as the lead underwriter. I was still quite young then. This is 20 years ago. And the Department of Justice announced they were breaking up the monopoly of Microsoft. They were going to separate Office, the applications, from, Windows, the operating system, the OS. And it never even went through, but that was the pin that burst the bubble. And that affected my life to the tune of $300 million lost for me personally. So I kind of have a bad reaction to the government making these announcements that they're going to do that. At the same time, when you read these statistics of, 95% of the growth in online mobile advertising was in the hands of two companies. And then the only reason it's going down is because Amazon's eating into their pizza now.
Oh, great.
And, that doesn't sound good. On the other hand, it creates opportunities for, if there are companies that have figured out that their customers listen to Joel and Marshall's podcast. You talked about the media jobs going away. You guys are broadcasters. I've got Fireside with a VC. That's my podcast. Everybody's a broadcaster now, and world will evolve that. What is your cost of acquiring a customer to the lifetime value, that ratio?
But the problem is that
someone's going to figure out how to put ads on your website and your podcast.
Well, I doubt that. One of the things that's happened, it's both good and bad. The good part is, yes, for instance, I think there's great new publications that are emerging. They're all online. They all depend on some sort of sponsor, major sponsor. I'm thinking of Unheard, Spiked, Tablet, Quillette. These are sort of the new voices that are exciting, but they're not businesses. They can't, the reason Marshall and I can do what we do is because we're subsidized by Chapman University. If I had to make a business out of this, we wouldn't be living in Orange County. We'd be living in a trailer, outside Elko, Nevada. So
okay, let's not slam those people. They're probably good people.
I'm not slamming them. I'm just saying, would I rather live?
Well,
in
you know
Orange
what though,
County
Joel?
Elko, Nevada?
To be fair about it, what the new world of technology has brought us is it's kind of gotten rid of the bottleneck of the distribution channel, right? In a way, like we can have a podcast like this. Andrew can have his own podcast. You have instant distribution to a very broad group of people. And so then it becomes a question of, are you promoting well enough to them? Are you getting enough critical mass to be able to attract advertisers? But once you do, your distribution economics have changed dramatically. You don't have to give the wholesaler and the retailer 60% of your gross margin in order to be able to make a living. So your threshold to be able to make a living has actually gone down quite a bit. And so that's the positive of it. The negative is you're now competing in a much larger pool directly with other content creators. And so that, that means you just have to be better at promoting yourself.
Well, also advertising as a revenue model is maybe limited. And so maybe, you could sharpen your pencil and find a different way to monetize your podcast, that is not related to advertising. So like I specifically, keep the advertising off my podcast. So I choose to not have any ads.
Yeah, same with us. Same with us.
I don't expect that would ever be anything. Whereas if somebody gets to hear us talking and they buy your book and they buy my book, I don't really make a lot of money on book sales either, but it's something, but it's nothing compared to the venture capital. If somebody hears my podcast or hears us talking and then reaches out to us and invests $1 million or, $500,000 or $100,000, we could turn that into $1 million. That's typically what we've done, 10x. So they'll get $1 million back. I get 100 grand in, and then our models, we get 20% of the profit. So getting 20% of the profit on $900,000 as a result of being on a podcast, that's a innovation economy, more imaginative way of monetizing.
Well, and also, is it a route? And this is how I think it's a perfect wrap for the kind of feel that we have in this podcast. Is that a new route for middle class growth? Okay, obviously, people who are starving to death and are living below the poverty level are not qualified investors for $100,000 in your fund. Right. But is this a way of middle class upward mobility?
Yeah. So I charge the government as guilty for the way they are setting the securities laws with the SEC and the enforcement with FINRA. So when the dot-com crash happened and Bernie Madoff with however many billions of dollars, the government decided they were going to protect grandmom and teenagers from the evil venture capitalists like me. And yet they encouraged them to buy stock in Enron, which will end really nicely for you. So it makes no sense. It's like the pandemic thing. You can go to a movie theater, but the hairdresser is going to be out of money. What is that, a political donation? How did that happen? It makes no sense. So I think that non-accredited investors should be allowed to invest as much into a venture capital fund as the stock market. Why is the stock market any better? They're unsupervised. They could put it all in Enron and lose it all. Whereas that'll never happen. We diversify and double down. It's much lower risk. So what the hell is the government doing messing with my business with this stupid, archaic 1933 nonsense?
Well, let me put it this way, Andrew, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you think that the regulations are bad now, I'll give you a couple of years and see what it looks like. I can see it getting rougher. Now, I think for the big companies, and this is the way history is, I'm a great believer, and I know you don't like the past too much, but the old saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
I think, one of the problems is going to be that we have a system which does not, which seems to be, the more it's regulated, the better it is for the big guys. One of the things I always try to tell my progressive friends is the more things, if Facebook wants a heavily regulated cyberspace because they're already on top.
They benefit from making it impossible to IPO. Like China.
Yes.
China right now has a robust capital markets where somebody can start a startup. So this is upward mobility of your middle class.
Right.
Get funded easily because the regulation was light touch on ability to raise capital. And then the company gets acquired. And like if a company is valued at 5x revenue or 10x revenue in the US, it's double that in China. So for somebody to buy a company with 10 million in revenue, they can justify buying it for $100 million and it'll be accretive. It'll cost them nothing to have bought that company. In the United States, the company that would be buying you because they're publicly traded is privately held, because the SEC and the US horrible government has made it $6 million to IPO and $6 million in compliance. Screw that. I'll stay private forever and I'll sell some of my founder shares in the next funding round. And now it's a white man's inner circle of Silicon Valley that I happen to be in, which is not the way we want it to be. Why don't we have the robust capital markets China has? Because our government sucks.
Well, and creating new feudalism, which is exactly
That's feudalism.
Well, what a perfect way to put a cap on our conversation. It's clear that the three of us agree that there is a feudal future, unfortunately, and it's getting more and more robust. Andrew, I just want to thank you so much for being part of our podcast and for sharing your points of view with us and having a great argument with Joel on how venture capital works and how it contributes to society. So thank you.
Well, Marshall, allow me just to say a closing comment that we may have a feudal future and we may have a present of feudalism today. However, I don't remember in my little lifetime ever so many pre-seed venture capitalists that want to invest in companies with no revenue. So many investors saying, we want to back VC funds that'll only back women. We want to back VC funds that'll only back African Americans and minority-led companies. We've never had this before. Social injustice, George Floyd really brought us forward. COVID has been an accelerant that everyone that wasn't using e-commerce is now using it and understands they need, technology. The Fortune 500 all figured out they need to automate and get tech, or they're going to be Kmart, not Walmart, the winner. And there's never been so much money to fund an early stage company. There's never been so much money to fund you up until theoretically the stock market, if the government could stop its bad behavior on making it impossible to IPO. So there's never been this much opportunity for someone to go from lower middle class or middle class to really do well and be part of the system. So there should be optimism that people can do this. And it's never been a better time to invest in a venture capital fund with so much M&A exit opportunities ahead of you. We've sold companies to Ring, and then Ring got acquired by Amazon. So a big fish eating the small fish, and everybody's making money. So I think there's a lot of positive things. So you shouldn't sit at home and say, oh no, I have to work in coal. No, you should tool yourself up, lift yourself up, and benefit from the system we have today, even with its flaws.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's great advice, and we appreciate your having been here and been on the show. We look forward to coming back for your coming back in a couple of years for a touch base on how all of this has evolved, where the regulatory environment has gone, where the government environment has gone. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.